You ever been out there, deep in the woods after the sun goes down, and you get that little prickle on the back of your neck? That feeling that maybe, just maybe, you're not as alone as you think you are? Well, tonight I've got a few stories about people who felt that exact same thing and then found out they were right.
So, this is how one guy, a really experienced solo hiker, started his story. See, he used to be that guy, the one who lived for the risk, who went looking for that deep, quiet isolation. But one trip into the Cherokee National Forest changed everything. It really makes you think. These kinds of encounters, they don't just scare you in the moment. They can fundamentally change who you are.
So what is it really? Is it the animals, the weather, or is it something older, something more primal that gets under our skin? That's what we're going to dig into. And these stories, they seem to point to two very different kinds of fear. The first one, well, it's terrifyingly human.
All right, let's start with that backpacker I mentioned. So picture this. He's caught in a really, really nasty storm. Miles from anywhere. He's soaked, he's cold, lightning is cracking all around him. He's in real trouble. And then, through the rain, like some kind of miracle, he sees it. A small cabin. A shelter.
He just bolts for it, throws the door open, and pretty much collapses inside, just so grateful to be out of the storm. For a little while, that's all that matters. He's safe. He's dry. But once the adrenaline starts to fade, he starts to actually look around. He starts to notice the little details.
At first glance, it just seems like a hunter's shack. A sleeping bag, some canned food, makes sense. But then he sees the scratches on the wall by the door, and they're unsettling. They're not from an animal. They look like they were made by fingernails. Desperate fingernails.
And that's when the trap clicks shut. He goes to check the door, and his blood runs cold. There's a simple latch, sure, but on the outside of the door frame, there's a heavy metal bracket for a padlock. There's absolutely no way to lock this thing from the inside. See, this cabin wasn't built to keep things out. It was built to keep something in.
Now, the dread is really setting in. He checks the only window in the place. Same story. It's been screwed shut with long wood screws, again from the outside. And the inside of the frame is just covered in these deep gouges, like someone had tried to claw their way out. He's not in a shelter. He's in a cage.
And then, he hears it. First, just a scraping sound along the outside wall. He tries to tell himself it's the storm. Then come heavy thumps on the porch. That's not the wind. Then he feels it, a heavy weight pressing against the door, testing it. And finally, the sound of shattering glass as something comes through the window, and the whole room just explodes in flames.
So what this hiker was facing was what we'll call tangible fear. The threat was another person. It was physical, it was immediate, and you know what? It was understandable. He was literally fighting for his life against an attacker he could see. But what happens when the threat makes no sense at all?
That brings us to our next story. This one's about a couple of friends, total thrill seekers, who thought it'd be a great idea to camp out for the night at the top of an abandoned 70-foot-tall fire tower. What started out as a bit of fun, well, it turned into something else entirely.
So the night begins with one of them banging on the tower, just as a joke, sending this huge clang echoing across the valley. Funny, right? But a few minutes later, a light appears in the trees below. And it's not a flashlight, it's floating, moving perfectly smooth, zipping between trees in a way that just isn't natural. It stops directly underneath them and then just blinks out. And then they start hearing it, grinding, clanging sounds from the metal frame of the tower itself. And then the truly impossible happens. A dark figure moves past their window, 70 feet off the ground.
The next morning, after a completely sleepless night, they decide to get the heck out of there. But they can't. A whole section of the steel staircase they climbed up is just gone. Not broken, not collapsed. It was deconstructed. Removed, piece by piece, in the dead of night while they were sitting right on top of it, and they never heard a thing.
And right there, the fear completely changed. This wasn't about getting in trouble with park rangers anymore. What happened was so bizarre, so physically impossible, that the threat wasn't just to their bodies. It was a threat to their sanity. It's the terror you feel when you can't even begin to understand what is happening.
So we've got a human threat, and we've got an impossible one. But this last story, this is about that terrifying place where those two fears meet. And it comes from another veteran camper, a guy who'd spent 15 years in the backcountry. He really thought he'd seen it all.
His trip starts with these little oddities that just keep escalating.
The first night, he sees what looks like a distant campfire, but the next morning, there's no trace of it. No ash, no burnt ground, nothing. The second night, on a perfectly calm, windless evening, he hears two massive trees crash down in two different directions. And then he hears a sound, a low, continuous, almost mechanical growl that's definitely not any animal he's ever heard.
So the next morning, he cautiously goes to investigate the closer of the two trees that fell, and the scene just makes no sense. This huge tree trunk isn't snapped, like from wind. The wood it's gouged and torn and looks like it was stripped and chewed apart by some unbelievable force. It wasn't the weather, and it wasn't an animal he'd ever want to meet.
And as he's backing away from this completely bizarre sight, he notices something on the ground, a small pile of gear. It's a blue bandana and a carabiner. And then he realizes they're his bandana and carabiner. He checks his pack, and they're gone. The same thing that did this impossible damage to a tree had also gone through his personal belongings. It knew he was there. It had been watching him the entire time.
Okay, so let's pull all this together. We've got a maniac in a cabin, some kind of entity that takes apart steel towers, and a silent, watchful force that tears down trees. What's the common thread here? What's the root of the horror in all these stories?
Well, you can see the two kinds of fear laid out pretty clearly. The cabin story, that's tangible fear. The threat is human. You're afraid of being physically hurt. But you know what is happening. The tower story, that's inexplicable fear. The threat is a total unknown. And the fear isn't just about your body, it's about your mind collapsing, because you have no idea how any of this is even possible. Your whole map of reality is just being torn to shreds right in front of you.
But for all their differences, there's one single unifying element that powers the terror in all three of these accounts. It's the real monster in the woods.
This is what we're actually afraid of. It's not the man with the fire or the shadow outside the window. It's that moment. That sickening, horrifying moment when you realize that your strength, your cleverness, your years of experience mean absolutely nothing. It's the moment you are rendered utterly and completely powerless. I mean, think about it. It doesn't matter if you're trapped in a burning cabin by a person or 70 feet in the air by a thing that breaks the laws of physics. The terror comes from the same place. It's that awful realization that you can't reason with it, you can't fight it, you can't understand it, and you can't escape it. The rules you've lived your whole life by just don't apply anymore.
Because in the end, the deep woods don't really need monsters. When we lose control, when we're truly alone and afraid, we get terrifyingly good at creating them all by ourselves. So the real question is, when you hear that sound, what kind of monster will your mind build? One you can fight, or one you can't even begin to comprehend?